Hi! In this video, we explore Pul5es by acModules for VCV Rack. Pul5es is a straightforward utility module that outputs one-shot or looping triggers upon receiving a configurable number of input triggers. The number of input triggers that Pul5es waits for before sending an output can be set between 2 and 256 triggers. This allows for a wide range of use cases and timings. To get started, we're going to set this instance of Pul5es to wait for 4 input triggers. We've set up a clock module to send triggers out on the beat and a reset on start. And we're visualizing the output on the scope. By default, Pul5es is set to one-shot mode, and you can see here that on the 4th input trigger, we send an output trigger, and no more. Another option is to turn on loop mode. Upon sending an output trigger, Pul5es will reset and start counting again. We can again visualize this using the scope. You can now see that every 4th input trigger, we send an output trigger. While these are the primary features of Pul5es, there is one more additional option in the context menu, and that is to inverse the logic of the Pul5es. We'll demonstrate this by turning off loop and enabling this option. Now, with our counter still set to 4, when we start our clock, Pul5es will send a trigger output on every trigger input up until the 4th input. If we re-enable loop mode, Pul5es will now send an output trigger on every input trigger except for the configured count. Now let's look at several use cases. Sometimes you might want to automate controls in a mix, like muting or unmuting tracks. Here we have 3 tracks that begin muted. We'll use Pul5es to automate unmuting them. The first track will be unmuted on the 64th input trigger. We send that to channel 2 of a merge module, which corresponds to track 2. Our next Pul5es module is set to trigger out on 96 input triggers, and that is going to both channels 3 and 4, corresponding to track 3 and 4 on the mixer. This next scenario is a little more complicated, using 10 instances of Pul5es. The first 4 are set with an increasing number of input counts, followed by another 4 with an even greater number of input counts. These correspond to 4 tracks on the mixer. We'll use these triggers to unmute and mute these tracks in a cyclic fashion. After we complete this sequence, we have another instance of Pul5es, which sends an output trigger to the clock's reset input, which then resets all of the pulses. Finally, we have one last instance of Pul5es, which is set to trigger just before the reset. Let's hear and see what happens. Lastly, we'll set up a sequence that would be incredibly difficult to create using traditional clock dividers or sequencers. Here, we have a kick drum playing on every beat from our clock. Pretty straightforward. However, the input counts on our Pul5es modules are set to the Fibonacci sequence. That is, the output count is the sum of the previous two modules' output counts. Each module is also set to loop mode, creating an incredibly intricate polyrhythm. Let's give it a whirl. And that's Pul5es. Thanks for watching.